So it's almost 2024, and everyone knows that making content, well, it makes sense. It's a really good strategy when it comes to growing your brand, whatever that might look like online. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people tend to put a lot of barriers to creating their podcast. I get it. Not everyone has a studio that looks this good and mics that sound this good. But what if you can produce your podcast completely using the power of something like Zoom? Now, whether that's bringing in remote guests or even producing podcasts as a supplier, as a videographer, as a creator for other people to earn yourself money doing remote podcast production, well, yeah, in 2024 and actually still in 2023, that's possible with Cinemaker. So let me show you. Let's dive in. My name is Marcangelo Coppola, and I'm a digital storyteller, entrepreneur, and creative who has made thousands of pieces of content online viewed by millions all over the world. But the one thing I have always been passionate about is helping people like you create great video content. That's why I partnered up with Cinemaker to create the Director Studio Show, a video podcast that brings you behind the scenes on the how-tos of creating a multi-camera show for entrepreneurs, creators, podcasters, and marketing experts who dream of creating simple, effective, and scalable video content. So let's dive in. So I've been doing video podcasts for a very long time, and let me tell you that the technology and the process of making it happen has only gotten easier. Now, let me say that again. It is only getting easier and easier and easier to create video content when it comes to making your brand stand out online. But here's the truth. A lot of people love to put their barriers in the way. They think that it has to be perfect. Truth is that a lot of people can't necessarily run or build a studio of this nature. There's a lot of technical complexities and lots of different things that can make this somewhat challenging. And I sometimes make it look easy, but I can tell you that there's always little failure points or random little cables or things that sometimes just don't work. So the truth is that I truly believe that the best way for you to make a podcast is to do it the simplest, most consistent way you can. And for most people, that's probably using the power of Zoom. Now, why would you want to use Zoom rather than running an in-studio podcast? The truth is, I live, for example, in Montreal. Now, Montreal's a great city, but it doesn't necessarily have 1,000 influencers and a bunch of amazing entrepreneurs rolling through all the time. So when I want to run my podcast and I want to, bring on an amazing guest, or I have, an amazing connection of somebody who's what I'll call a blue chipper, right? Somebody who's like a recognized face or brand or name or guest or, with a, sizable following or a sizable history or career behind them. They're not always going to be in town. They're not always going to want to, fly out to come and do my podcast either. And I can't just wait for them to have to roll through town to necessarily have those guests on my show. But if some amazing guest wants to show up, or some person who I'm interested in speaking to, no matter how big or small they are, wants to show up on my show, then the best way for doing that would be to use the power of Zoom. Now, Cinemaker has some amazing features that enable you to bring in remote guests live in high quality HD footage, 1080p potential. Now, I say 1080p with the caveat that if somebody has a 720p camera on their laptop, yeah, it's going to only be up to 720p. But as long as they have a really good looking camera, they have a 1080p camera or better, you can get that full HD quality coming right into your podcast remotely. Now, that's one layer of what happens. But as a podcast producer, I've also been asked quite a bit about how could I help somebody else produce their podcast for them? And my answer was simple. I don't want to leave my house. I really don't want to have to leave my home environment with all my setup and all my gear and any of those different things to help them produce their podcast. So I actually used another amazing feature, which is again related to the direct integration that Cinemaker has with Zoom's SDK and the Zoom systems, the APIs of Zoom, so to speak, or kind of the, for the geeks out there, or the non-geeks, out there, the connection that Zoom enables us to have, where we can do what is called remote production, or I can do what is called remote production for those people. So I want to show you exactly what those two things mean, how I believe this can empower you to get off your ass and start your video podcast in 2024, and to not make the excuse that somehow you need better and better and better tech to make this happen. So with that said, I'm going to dive in. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to show you a little bit of how that works. So I have here in front of me this demo computer that I'm just running a kind of mock version of Cinemaker. Now, it's a real version of Cinemaker, but it's just not recording because I want to demo how that would work. So I've got these two cameras here. I've got the webcam and I've got this kind of, cell phone camera that I've got here. Obviously, the camera quality on this is not necessarily to write home for, but it's just there to give you a mock version. Now, here's the beautiful, amazing feature that Cinemaker has, which is, boom, you pull up this camera monitor and you've got your Zoom login down over here on the bottom left-hand side, and you've got these two different buttons, okay? One is called Remote Guest, the other is called Remote Production. Now, what's the difference between a Remote Guest feature and a Remote Production feature? Now, Remote Guest is they both function very similarly in the sense that I would bring on somebody like Kyler, who's here on screen over here. I'm just gonna pull him up. There he is. So Kyler's, taking notes in the background. He currently, in this moment, is a remote guest on this podcast, meaning I started a Zoom meeting and then sent him the Zoom link. He joins that Zoom meeting. I activate his cameras, and then I bring him on as one of the cameras. So we're going to do exactly that. I'm going to show you exactly how that's done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to join my meeting in progress because we're currently in this meeting. Again, Kyler and I are already in a meeting on my Zoom account. So I'm going to join this meeting in progress. But if we weren't already in a meeting, this would be, start meeting, or I would be able to click scheduled meetings and do those things. I would look at the meeting info and send him this meeting info. I'd send him this link, for example. Now, again, he's already there, and you see that I'm already there and he's already there. So I'm going to activate Kyler. I'm going to bring on his camera, and now you're going to see in Cinemaker as guest, camera active. When I come back, boom, there he is. All of a sudden, you've got Kyler and his mic and everything that we need coming through on Cinemaker right here and right now. So he is now a remote guest. Now, the interesting thing about how this works is as a remote guest, what you're now doing is they're going to see every camera cut and decision that I would be making in Cinemaker. Okay, so as a remote guest, they are seeing the output of what is being recorded if I were to hit this big red button over here and participate in that. Now, the difference is if I come back out of here and I'm going to leave this meeting. I'm not going to end it because I'm going to keep Kyler in there and make sure that he's still hearing me here on this computer. And I did remote production. Remote production says, hey, I want to host a meeting, but I don't want everyone to see the output of the meeting, and I don't necessarily even want to be one of the cameras. So I could turn off all the cameras, right? I could turn off the FaceTime camera and the iPhone, and I can, go and do all of these different things. I can join the meeting in progress, and let's imagine this is a meeting between, Kyler and whoever Kyler wants to interview, right? Let's say it's his future wife, right? So you would see Kyler's name here and Tanya's name over there, and you would see, would be able to turn on his, the cameras. I would be able to turn on this camera, and I'd be able to turn on this camera. Let's try what that's going to do. And now you're seeing a very meta scenario of what is going on over here. Now that meta scenario is a little funky just because all of a sudden I'm showing up twice, right? It's a little weird. So I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to turn off B here because I think it's a little confusing. But imagine here that I could have had multiple Zoom guests show up all at the exact same time while I am nowhere to be seen. The only way they would see or hear me is if I were to join the Zoom meeting or turn on my camera or switch on into that meeting in another way, either on another device or even on the same device that I'm using. So the interesting thing here, and I'm just going to kind of, get back to this camera over here. The interesting component here is that bringing on a remote guest in Cinemaker is literally as simple as logging on. Well, number one, opening Cinemaker, creating an account, setting that up and upgrading, doing that whole thing, having a Zoom account, logging into that Zoom account, starting a meeting, sending the link, having them show up, letting them in the room in certain cases if you have some kind of like waiting room, letting them in the room, then activating their cameras, and then just switching between the different camera angles, just like I'm switching right over here, right? Camera 1, camera 2, I could do it with clicking. I could do it with command 1, command 2, switch to the different cameras depending on the number of the cameras that there are, and then literally bring them and allow their conversation to fluctuate and flow through on real time. Now, how do I listen? All I do, okay, is very quickly, I just come here and I turn on audio monitoring. So I turn on the audio monitoring. I would make sure that the audio monitoring is on for all my different guests. And as they speak, I would be able to hear and see what they're saying. I'd be able to literally listen. So as one guest would speak and now the other is about to speak, I would hear them and I would just switch cameras. I would prepare and use the power of Cinemaker's editor and all the different things that go with that to mask any mistakes or recut the whole thing, do all of those different layers on my own. Now, I know I glossed over this incredibly quickly, so let me say this one more time very simply. There are two ways that I can interact with people in Zoom. I can either bring in Zoom guests as part of my own production where my cameras are on and I'm bringing them on as remote guests. And I can, by the way, I can bring them on as remote guests and say nothing and just have them talk while still showing them the output of the show. That's remote guests. Or I can do remote production, not show them the output of the show so they don't see me. They don't need to see me. They don't have to see any of the things that I'm doing. And I'm just now sitting in the comfort of my home, producing a show with the power of my computer, with all the files on my computer, so that after I hit record, they talk, they do their thing, I switch cameras. Eventually, it's going to switch for them, just like it does on voice Zoom things. Little Easter egg for those of you who are paying attention to the future of Cinemaker. That's coming for you. So it starts to switch for you. It starts doing the thing. And now all you need to do is click end, and voila, it's done. And all I need to do is export or already exports. But if I want to go into the editor or add different layers, do any different cuts or changes, export that into another software if I want to get fancy with it or do some other things if I really want to. But the point is that the production is done. I could have live streamed it. I could have streamed it Zoom. I could have done it as a multitude of different things. But the power of Zoom's integration and the ability to bring in people in full 1080p HD, as well as bring in some ISO recordings, which you'll hear about very, very, very soon, is all part of this integration that Cinemaker and Zoom now have. So there's really no excuse. And I'm going to say this here. There's absolutely no excuse to why you wouldn't start making really valuable and amazing content in your niche about you or your brand or the things that you represent, that you're passionate about, and make that podcast in 2024. I truly believe that it will help you grow. It will help you be a better presenter. It'll help you be a better seller. It'll help you be a better content producer. It'll help you make more of what you want, and it will attract the people that you are looking for, whether that be your community or your clients. And there's just no excuse. It's as easy as joining and starting a Zoom meeting. So anyway, there is one last thing I want to say. Kyler and I, we do something called remote access. We do remote production in a very even different way, which allows him to control a whole other layer, where it's not just controlling my webcam or one camera that many Zoom guests would come in, but how Kyler controls these many cameras that I have over here. Well, that's a whole other topic for another episode. Anyway, enjoy. Start your podcast 2024.